Welcome to Ethiopia Today. We will cover the following topics in our today's presentation. Scoop editor lashes out Western media reports about Ethiopia. Ethiopian monuments 1,000 years older than previously thought. The details are as follow. Scoop editor lashes out Western media reports about Ethiopia. The international media, especially some of the Western ones, have failed to be impartial on reporting the current situation in Ethiopia, Scoop independent news editor-in-chief Alastair Thompson said, as reported by Ethiopian press agency. In an exclusive interview with ENA, the editor-in-chief said some of the Western media have been propagating the TPLF agenda rather than being fair and balanced with what is really happening in Ethiopia. I find it astonishing that the international media have become blind to what has been happening. I think there are some interesting questions to explore and ask why that is the case. Ultimately, they come back to the beginning of the war, he added. To show how the international media deliberately ignore to what has been happening in the country, Thompson cited the Galacoma massacre committed by the TPLF in Afar State at the end of July and early August 2021. At the end of July and early August there was the Galacoma massacre. But this was not reported at all by Western media, unlike Aljazeera, which reported the issue at the time. In contrast, the Western media have been providing wide positive coverage for TPLF, he noted. When the TPLF is losing, however, we consistently see this pattern of diplomacy and the media coming to aid the group, the editor-in-chief stated. Even if hundreds and hundreds of trucks had gone into Tigray, the main story consistently told by the international media was famine being used as a weapon by the government of Ethiopia and people of Tigray were not getting food, Thompson explained. However, none of this was really big issue after the middle of July, as soon as the TPLF invaded the Amhara and Afar states and harmed civilians in these states. At the very beginning of the war, the Western media was focused on the day of the US election, according to the editor-in-chief. The US election completely transfixed the entire planet, so everybody was focused on what was happening in the United States. They weren't focused on what was happening in Ethiopia. The first 3 or 4 stories that the Associated Press wrote about the war in November were focused on how surprised the government was and about the chaos. Now, at the same time, there is obviously a lot of focus on Ethiopia's case, and very concerted, very organized propaganda operation, which was spun up before the war even started, he pointed out. Giving another example about the bias of the media, Thompson recalled that TPLF attacked North Gondar and were clearly planning on marching into Dabra Taba as they had done in 1991. But they were defeated. Following the pushback, a report emerged. The report was, however, suddenly dropped by the European-based TPLF media that have been dominating information with the intention of pressuring the government of Ethiopia by the international community as well as the West, the editor-in-chief elaborated. Thompson also said reports sometimes come out with the intention of generating negative publicity to be used against the Ethiopian government. He mentioned a story like bodies floating in the Tekezi River in August and then the second one in September made up by the Western media. Ethiopian monuments 1,000 years older than previously thought. Rising as high as 20 feet, ancient stone monoliths in southern Ethiopia are 1,000 years older than scientists previously thought, according to a new study in the Journal of African Archaeology. A Washington State University research team used advanced radiocarbon dating to determine the often phallic-shaped monoliths or stele at the Sakaro-Sodo archaeological site in Ethiopia's Gadio zone were likely created sometime during the 1st century AD. The only other attempt to determine the age of the more than 10,000 stele monoliths located at various sites in the Gadio zone was conducted by French scientists in the 1990s. It provided a far more modest construction date of around 1100 AD for the monuments of Tutofela in the northern part of Gadio. Under consideration as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Sakaro-Sodo and other archaeological sites in the Gadio zone have the largest number and highest concentration of megalithic stele monuments in Africa. The standing stones range widely in size, function, and arrangement in the landscape. While many of the monoliths have fallen and/or are undecorated, a few have intricately wrought faces and other anthropomorphic designs carved into the stone that can be seen today. Despite the impressive nature of the archaeological site, little is known about why or how the monoliths were built. This is one of the most understudied archaeological sites in the world, and we wanted to change that, said Dr. Ashenofi Zena, lead author of the study and a former Washington State University doctoral researcher now at the State Historical Society of North Dakota. Dr. Zena, an Ethiopian native, originally decided to conduct a study of the stones after traveling to the region with his doctoral advisor Andrew Duff, a Washington State University professor of anthropology, in 2013. It was shocking to see such a large number of monuments in such a small area, Zena said. Looking at the stones, many of which had fallen to the ground and some have broken into pieces, I decided to focus my dissertation work there instead of investigating cave sites in southern Ethiopia, Zena added. In addition to pushing back the date of the earliest monolith's construction by a millennium, the researchers also determined where the ancient builders of the site likely quarried raw stone for the project. They also identified, for the first time, the earliest known sources of obsidian artifacts that were recovered from the Gadio steel sites. Surprisingly, most of the obsidian the researchers identified at Sakaro Sodo originated some 300 kilometers away in northern Kenya, illustrating that the people at Sakaro Sodo obtained most of their obsidian raw materials through some form of exchange or trade. While little is known about the pastoral and/or agricultural people who populated the Sakaro Sodo region of southern Ethiopia at the turn of the first millennium, the new construction dates of the stele monuments identified by Zena and Duff appear to coincide with the arrival of domesticated animals in the region and the beginnings of more complex social and economic systems. One of the reasons why this research is important is because it has the potential to shed new light on what the earliest people in this area were doing for a living as well as what their cultural and social practices were, Professor Duff said. Existing archaeological, ethnographic, and living megalithic stele traditions in the region suggest that the oldest stele sites in Ethiopia at Sakaro Sodo and other nearby locations were likely created for two purposes: either to commemorate the transfer of power from one generation to the next or to record and commemorate group achievement. The diversity of function of the stele in Ethiopia is really fascinating, Duff added. For example, we know that the more recently constructed stele monuments of Tuto Fella in the north part of Gadio were used as burial markers. While the linear placement pattern of the earliest stones at Sakaro Sodo makes us think they may have been markers to signify the passing of generational leadership. While the political situation and the recent escalation of the COVID-19 pandemic in Ethiopia make following up on the investigation in the near term difficult, the researchers have several future projects in the works that they hope to continue as soon as possible. One project involves more additional archaeological investigations at other stele sites in the areas with colleagues at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. The other is a project led by Duff and current Washington State University doctoral student Addis Alem Melessa, who are working with the Ethiopian Department of Archaeology and Heritage Management to determine how the stele sites can be better managed to both preserve the heritage of the region and generate tourism. Developing a better understanding of the function of these stones and how they were erected is really useful in terms of gaining a UNESCO World Heritage designation, Professor Duff underscored. This could in turn help generate tourism revenue, which is a major economic factor for the country. Thanks so much, our viewers. Don't forget to like and share. And also subscribe to our channel if this is your first time. Let's do our part in disseminating the messages to many people as much as possible. And by doing so, you are fighting for Ethiopia and also inspiring us to continue producing these and similar news. God bless Ethiopia and its people. Many thanks.